This is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
And welcome back to the live stream portion of Newsmakers this morning. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has been so gracious to stay with me, as has Acting Chief Martha Montalvo and Doug Griffith, who's the Vice President of the Houston Police Officers Union. We've been talking, all of us, about what happened in Dallas and some of the issues that maybe some of the answers that we can come up with. And I know, Chief, you've been talking about, and you were both talking about, how the community policing seems to work. And you've been a part of it as well. Talk about what actually has a go into place. They can't all be out on the street all the time, can they? Have to kind of be in cars?
No, obviously we got to answer calls for services, and there's things that we have to respond to. But what I've asked my commanders to do is to look at time periods where there's a lot of people out and about, where we can put officers on bikes, where we can have officers walking a beat. Because I think it's important for us to start this communication, talking to people, and just engaging. You know, policing is changing. It's not just about catching the bad guys. It's about engaging communities, working with people. People
are going to want to know, what can they do to de-escalate circumstances that happen? You know, when these shootings happen, in Minneapolis, for example, that was a tragic shooting. You could see it on video. And Doug, I know there was a situation where the gentleman said he was, from what we know, perhaps reaching for the training of officers. How much of a role needs to play into that? Because when he comes, it seemed to me that he was nervous, as he would be if he felt somebody had a gun.
Yes, sir.
But perhaps he might have been more angst-filled about a black guy in a car as opposed to somebody from a different color. The governor said that if it had been a white person, he might not have been the same outcome.
Well, I'm going to disagree with those comments. First of all, you got to understand, we have a job to do. When there's a weapon introduced in from anyone on the outside, your first thought is that weapon. I have been involved in a police shooting. I didn't have a clue what color that gentleman was because I was focused on that pistol. And that is something that happens 9 times out of 10 when you're talking about these type of incidents. When someone gets a call to a disturbance with a weapon, then you're already on a heightened alert. Once you see that weapon, then you are trained to react. And our training kicks in every time we have one of these officer-involved shootings. Just like the one that happened here in Houston 2 days ago. Those officers are just driving down the street and someone's pointing a weapon at them. They have to take action. There's no other way to do it if you want to go home at the end of the night.
I've seen clips on YouTube where people talk about that, about the important thing for everybody to think about is that everybody needs to go home at the end of the night. That's the big thing. Black Lives Matter has really been calling attention to that in many ways. There seems to be a lot of positive things about the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of creating an awareness, but they're also in the spotlight of negativity. Our own Lieutenant Governor says the Black Lives Matter movement was basically responsible for the shootings in Dallas, if I read the quote correctly. But your thoughts about that?
I didn't read his quote, but I would vigorously disagree with any suggestion that these young people who I've not been involved with all of them, but I've seen them in various places, including Houston, and I've seen them desire peace. Let's look at this from a perspective of being a problem solver and making derogatory comments about young people similar to what was made about the movement that Dr. King led, and John Lewis and Andy Young, now Dr. King dead, and others in their 70s and 80s, recognizing that they did help steer America to a greater place. And I think these young people will do so as well. First of all, we'll be turning over the reins of government and chief positions and congressperson positions and police positions to these young people. But let's find a solution. I've introduced the Law Enforcement and Integrity Act, which has garnered large numbers of law enforcement support for all over the nation, that provides the infrastructure for training and incentive grants to departments like the Houston Police Department to do innovative teaching or innovative police science. One of those things is de-escalation, and how do you approach it? Now, let me say that I understand and want officers to go home and to be safe. In the instance of Mr. Castillo, no gun was shown. It is represented and it's investigated, at least the facts that have come out now, and the facts, as I said, are still being investigated, that the individual, Mr. Castillo, said, I have a license to carry. And maybe at that point there should have been a retreating to a certain extent, calling for backup. But I want to join with Chief Ramsey, who chaired the President's Committee on Policing or Violence that occurred after the Michael Brown and Tamir Rice and all those incidences. And he's indicated that maybe we should look at regional police structures, that big cities like Houston, and I know this will be difficult, and I know that it'll be a long time coming, and it may never come, should be regional, that they have the capacity to embrace some of the surrounding areas, which would heighten pay, which would heighten training and police tactics to get people home. Lastly, let me say this. We in the United States Congress should step up. I believe that we should have more funding to give to police departments around America to do the things that we're saying, the police training. We had the Cops on the Beat program. We need to restore that so that Chief can have more overtime. She needs more men and women, and we provided that over the 90s. If I might, with humor, I remember Mayor Lanier. I was on the council who brought then, I think, a young man candidate by the young man who was a candidate at the time, Bill Clinton, and we stood on the steps of City Hall with police officers making the point, if you ever get elected president, we want the Cops on the Beat program. We want to fund this program. I'm a champion of that. We've got to get our friends in the Congress to not divide on that. Give that money back to the community and let them use it so that they can do all the things that we want to have done. Part of the law enforcement integrity is a whole matrix of training police, giving them incentives, and asking for them to seek accreditation in a body that they establish.
I know in your relationship with the Homeland Security and the other criminal justice committees that you're involved in, that you have interactions with police chiefs all the time. And Chief, we were talking earlier about the organization of chiefs that you're a member of as well. What is the concern among chiefs that you're dealing with that about any kind of tone that's going on nationally, or the kinds of things that big city police departments need to kind of keep an eye out on right now? Is everybody on a heightened sense of alert, or is it just kind of reinforcing those things that you already do?
What we discuss is current trends and obviously incidents that have been happening across the country. And we discuss them very openly, and we bring the chiefs that are involved in those incidents.
Pretty regularly it's happening?
It happens pretty regularly, and it happens for a reason, because we have to learn from each other. We have to ensure that we understand what went wrong or what went right. So it's important to have these communications with each other as a profession. In terms of what the Congresswoman is saying, I totally agree. Training is important, and I welcome any additional funding that I can get from the government in terms of overtime. But currently, this past training year, all our officers are going through de-escalation training. This coming training cycle, which begins in September, we're going to focus on scenario-based de-escalation, which means we take what we learned, the philosophy of de-escalation, and actually put it into real-life scenario training. Because I believe that the more you practice something, the more you use it, then it becomes ingrained. And in moments of stress, officers always will revert back to their training. So we are moving forward in that direction.
And that's a good point, because I've heard also when you talk about training, it's difficult to train out of someone any kind of prejudices they may have. But if you're trained enough, that training can overcome that. Doug, before we go, and I'm going to ask all of you this, what's your thoughts about how this whole thing is going to work? How are we going to do? I mean, as a country, as a department, all of us have a stake in all of this. Whether you're in Congress, whether you're a chief, whether you're on the beat, just driving my car, I think about, okay, and I haven't been pulled over in a long time, but as a young man, I was told early on, as a 14-year-old kid, as soon as I got a driver's license, that whenever I got pulled over, I needed to put my hands on both hands up here, and yes, sir, no, sir. And it was because my life might have been a little bit, but I grew up in a different time period. I'm older than most of you here, since you're so young people. What is your sense about how we're going to do with all of this, the angst that we're dealing with now?
Well, there are several things. Number one, communication is the key. We have to be in communication with police officers, the civilians, everybody needs to work together. It doesn't matter what color we are. Inside, we're all the same. If I get cut, I'm going to bleed red just like you would. We have to get past the skin color thing and start looking at overall, what are we going to do as a society? Number two is we need to also start, one, as she said, as our chief said, training. Training is very important. But we cannot do the proper training. We cannot be good community-oriented police officers without the numbers. We are anywhere from 800 to 1,500 down right now in manpower just in the city of Houston. And this is a systemic problem across the nation. Recruiting is down. Officers, people that want to be policemen, they do not come to this job. Pay benefits or the lack of respect. And until we fix some of that and start communicating better, we're going to continue to have these type of issues.
Chief, what do you tell that person who might want to consider police as a career?
Come on down. This is one of the most, I joined very young, and this is outside of my family, this is the best thing I've ever done. It's a sense of accomplishment. And I don't mean to disagree with Doug, because I think very highly of him, but we have been very fortunate in this city that we have not had an issue with recruiting. We have gotten the individuals to sign up. And the mayor has given us 5 classes this year and 5 classes next year, which means if everything stays right, that we will grow by 200 officers, which is good. We're going in the right direction. Do we need more officers? Of course. But we're going in the right direction in terms of growth. And I welcome anybody who thinks that they can make a difference and that they want to join an organization that is progressive and wants to be a part of the community as well as serve the community, because that's what we are as public servants. Then to go to hpdcareer.com or our website, thehoustonpolicedepartment.org, and sign up, and we welcome you.
Congresswoman, I give you the last word on what we can do as a country and individuals. Let's try to make sure that we can do something to dissipate the angst that seems to be prevalent over us right now.
Well, first of all, let me say that as an elected official and trusted by many voters, I want to be part of the solution and not be part of the problem. I have a great admiration for law enforcement officers and the stress and the work that they do. This is a country of laws, and we respect it. But I also want to say that I have a great admiration for doctors. And doctors see patients that come in with different ailments, and they must be sympathetic to those different patients and give different remedies. As a member of Congress, as an elected official in this community, I have individuals who have different ailments. I have to be empathetic to the pains of the Hispanic and African American community, young people, and so I have to appreciate differences and I have to acknowledge it. And to my other constituents who may have no differences or why aren't we just the same, I want to say to them, we live in a great country that gives us the pathway to be different, but then to be unified. So I want to help the chief with funding for overtime, training and de-escalation, pass that legislation. I want my good friends who are Second Amendment champions to recognize the thousands, 13,000 in 2015 and 26,000 in 2015, 13,000 in 2013 that have been killed by guns and gun violence. That doesn't mean that I want to take away guns. I just want to do as Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia said, let's regulate so that we can have safe police, that AR-15s are not on the street, and that we can have safe people. Let's investigate actions that were taken by law enforcement in a transparent way and communicate with the community. That's part of it, information to everyone. Those who disagree and say they should have done what they did, and others who are in pain. So allow me to be that doctor without a degree, because I've got to listen to the pain of the vastness of my community that I represent and the nation, because when I leave here, I become a lawmaker for the United States of America. And believe me, we are seeing person after person come who's a victim of gun violence. And they're not political, they're not running from one place to the next and saying, I want to make sure I'm on the Republican side or Democratic side, they're saying, Congress, we want you to respond to our pain. So I think where we need to go with this evening, I hope that we will see an array of diversity in this march for peace, for unity, to tell Houston that we're on their side, no matter who they are. And then I hope I'll be able to take this message back to my colleagues. This can be done. All of us need to shortchange our rhetoric and make sure it follows somewhat of Robert F. Kennedy's language on the night Martin died, because I remember that I was out in the street because it was so overwhelming I could not comprehend it. Not violently. Thank God maybe his teachings permeated our DNA non-violently, but we were overwhelmed. So it is our place now who have experience, no matter what our race, is to embrace differences, to acknowledge them, and then to point them in the direction of the greatness of this nation, and that is that we can work together. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Appreciate you always. Doug, good to see you as well.
Thank you for having us.
Stay safe.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for
Absolutely.
all that you do.
Stay
for all
safe.
that you do.
Yes,
Please.
sir.
Stay
You know
safe.
it.
Thank you all. We'll see you on Houston Newsmakers on July 24th.